Mic check, mic check, mic check, mic check.
Mic check 1 2 3. Mic check 1 2 3.
And so completes our night checks, mic checks. Welcome aboard, everybody, to the Enough to Keep Going weekly games podcast. My name is Game Logic on Twitch. One of the co-hosts of this here show, also a video logger over on the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube. Here with you tonight to help you along through this discussion, and along with me for the ride is my fellow co-host, Mr. Swiss Guard. How you doing, Swiss?
Good. I can't believe we've been. I mean, it's just this iteration of the show, but it's been 4 years at this iteration, and it goes back way before that.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. I've been listening to a lot of the back episodes, and it's a thing. So we have quite a bit in store for you tonight. Quite a bit in terms of level of detail that we're going to get to. I don't know that it's very wide in breadth because there really haven't been a ton of announcements that have kind of fit within our envelope of what we're most interested in. So, without much further ado, let's get started. So, on the slate for tonight, by the way, if you haven't joined the podcast before, which I would find very hard to believe, but it's possible, this is our deep dive format episode. So every other week we go back and forth. This week is deep dive. Last week and again next week we do our GX show, our gamer experience show, which is where we recount everything that we've been playing for the 2 week time period in between the deep dives. So, but tonight we're going to dig deep into industry news and talk about the trends and the dynamics across the industry and get down into the specifics. One of the things we got to dig hard at is the announcement of the Nintendo Switch OLED model. And so I want to say, was it earlier this week that this got announced?
I think it's got to be last week.
I'm in a
I don't know.
time warp. So,
Yeah.
so sometime fairly recently, the Nintendo Switch got announced. This article labels it as the Nintendo Switch Pro. It's not really a Pro, as everyone by now understands. I admit that I was in shock for the first few minutes, hours ish. It took me quite a long time, not as long. It took me about an hour to dig around as all the announcements were popping like starlights on the horizon to come to the understanding that this is really nothing special from a hardware perspective. I kept looking for information about an updated processor or GPU or anything at the truly digital level, and there's not. Actually, it came out originally with some misinformation that it did not include an OLED screen, or at least didn't include a larger screen. I think that was later corrected, at least in some of the news coverage that I was watching. And so it is a 7-inch OLED, has an updated design to the stand. That stand is wider instead of as thin as it is currently today on the Nintendo Switch. Includes a new dock, but as far as I can tell, that dock doesn't really do anything. It includes an additional onboard Ethernet port. This model arrives on the 8th of October. So it is not the same as the new 3DS, new 3DS XL, when they came out, which I think came out about 4 years after the launch of the Nintendo 3DS. So we're roughly at the same point in the timeline in the life cycle of those two product SKUs. And one's upgrade is not quite doing what the last ones did. Swiss, what were your feelings about this? Initial reactions, responses? Does this bother you at all?
Um, I was initially excited and then a little bit let down. Um, there are some things that I like. I mean, it looks nice, and the bigger screen is, you know, better. um, and honestly, like the kickstand. So here's the Switch kickstand from my Switch, which my wife found just this very morning, like in a random corner of the dining room. Uh, I generally even keep it off my Switch because I don't want to lose it for like the few times I'm on the road and actually want a kickstand when I take it with me. So I try to kind of hide it, but it never stays on. So like that is a welcome addition. Um, for some people, like the Ethernet port is important. But by and large, like those are, you know, they're niceties. But I guess I just wanted a little bit more. It would have been nice to have 4K support in like at least in docked mode. Although, I got to be honest, I recently bought a 4K TV, and I still think the Switch looks great on it. Like it still looks nice. So I'm not. It's not like a huge letdown, but when I was looking at like the new 3DS and the what the rumors were having with the Switch Pro, that fed my expectations. Um, that being said, when you actually look at the new 3DS, and I don't think that there were a lot of games that really took advantage of the more powerful hardware from what I understand. Like so and even back in the Nintendo 64 era, there were a few games that took advantage of that expansion. You remember the expansion pack, like and you plug it in the front. Um, actually, yeah, that guy. So the but Perfect Dark ran a little bit better, I think. But like, there weren't a lot of games even then that were like, oh, you need to have this thing, or it's going to be a horrible experience. So like, you know, I can understand why Nintendo was like, why are we gonna try to invest in throwing out more powerful hardware when we never really have taken advantage of the more powerful hardware, like in these mid-cycle refreshes. So like, I'm not like it. I don't think the sky's falling or anything. But you know, prior to the announcement, there had been rumors that this fall was going to be the date for the new hardware, and I was like gearing up to like be excited about buying it, and I don't know if I'm going to buy one now.
So let's pick those things apart kind of one by one because we have plenty of time tonight because we don't really have a ton of topics. But so the 7-inch OLED, right? Does that make any difference to you? For
I
me,
think that's
yeah. Go ahead.
that's the biggest discriminator for me too. I mean, like that's a good feature to have, like a bigger screen. Yes, that's nice.
Now, do you play a lot in undocked mode?
I don't personally, unless I'm on a road trip, but my family does, and
Okay,
like my wife exclusively plays undocked.
okay. And you think the OLED will make a difference to her?
I think she'll like it better, but she is not as technically discriminating as you and I would be.
Yeah.
So maybe I am projecting my desires for a larger screen onto her, but I think that's a better. I mean, it'd be nicer.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, it's not the size. I don't know that like I'm at an age where I have to play my if I'm playing my Nintendo Switch undocked with my Joy-Cons, which for various reasons I never really do because and one of the reasons is because with my visual acuity, I have to take my glasses off and hold the screen really close to my face. I typically leave my glasses on um, so because of both my glasses and the controller. So I leave my glasses on. I insist on only playing my Switch pretty much with the Pro controller. I have refused to play with my Joy Cons. I actually, in my effort to rearrange my studio and computer room, which I just finished, it took me about 2 weeks, and it wasn't rearranging. It was a lot of the way I have things stored in bed. It was kind of like uh, the project that you see guys from olden times, or maybe modern guys too, who aren't gamers, but guys who have tons of tools in their garage, and then they have to like move all the tools out of the garage and restock them because they have to rebin them in drawers. That's what I've been doing the last 2 weeks. So I've finally done. I found my Joy-Con grip and my Joy-Con charge, and so I put them back in a storage box for use. But in general, I only play with my Pro controller, and so so when I travel, I typically don't even take my Joy Cons. A lot of times I just take the screen, put it in a case, and I bring the Pro controller along. So I play with it on a table far enough away from my face with my glasses on because I'm playing with the because I need room between me and the screen for the Pro controller. So I don't necessarily know that the larger screen, when I am playing with my Joy Cons, a larger screen wouldn't do me any good. It would actually be worse because with my glasses off, I'd have to cover a wider screen. But I am enamored by the OLED because that would help with the battery power. Now again, I'm not, I could see a past life where I would have been on my Switch on a plane a lot, and that would have made an even bigger difference to me. I used to be super like wrapped around the axle about battery power. I already have battery anxiety as it is, but when I travel and I get layovers, and then you're down in the airport, and then you got to find the charger in your bag, and like yeah. So the OLED, the impact of the OLED screen on battery power would have been nice. It's a little disappointing that concurrently Nintendo didn't increase the size of the battery. I know that they've already made one. I think they've made one very small battery update, but they've made a CPU update that is supposed to operate the battery more efficiently. It would have been nice if you would have gotten a package that would have had, this improved CPU efficiency of the battery, the OLED screen to further make battery usage less of an impact, but then also to get a tweak and actually updated battery capacity, no matter how small, to just kind of converge around a really big battery improvement with the Nintendo Switch for people who are traveling. Again, wouldn't have made a bigger impact to me, but would have made me feel better about the notion that the $350 was really commensurate. So I didn't talk about that. The cost of the package is $349.99, so it's a $50 bump in price when I would contend what a lot of people are looking for would have been a price cut by this point in the Nintendo Switch's life cycle. How do you feel about the price at this point, 4 years into the Switch's life?
Um, I'm not going to be too critical of them for not dropping the price, given you know the way demand has been going. Like it's um, it still sells strong, I believe, right? So, um, yeah, I'm not gonna really fault them for that because I don't feel like the at $300 that it's like exorbitantly overpriced. Like for what it is, like okay, that's kind of what I expect to pay. Roughly. Would it be nice to have a price cut? Yeah, but that's what the Switch Lite's supposed to be, right? Um,
How do you think that plays on the market, though? So you're going into holiday season. You've got the 299 in Xbox Series S on the market, which I've always commented that it gets left out of conversation so much that not only is the Series S the, I would argue, the incredible piece of hardware it is that brings so much power, it's at a price point that makes it directly competitive with the current SKU of the Nintendo Switch, and now is going to actually by this holiday season will actually be the lowest price console on the market. Right? If you look at the Switch Lite, I kind of look at the Switch Lite as more like the true successor to the 3DS, and it's really a portable device. I mean, it doesn't have a dock, so it's really not a TV, a widescreen TV type console. So the Xbox Series S will now be the cheapest console on the market. At 350, you're going to slot the new Switch in under the, I guess, all digital version of the PlayStation 5, and only by $50. So I wonder, does it create this area where, supply notwithstanding, but you go, am I going to pay $350 for a Nintendo Switch, or am I just going to save up an extra $50 and get an all digital version of the PlayStation 5, which plays the entire PlayStation 5 library with no hardware delta between the PS5 all digital and disc version and the vast majority of the PlayStation 4 library? How do you feel like that positions it in the market?
well, I think there with the price there are kind of I think two ways of looking at it. Your focus is on the competition from the other manufacturers, and I actually don't see it as much of a problem with regards to that. Like the fact that it is still under the PS5 is good because I don't think you're not going into Nintendo versus PlayStation and being like it's essentially kind of the same experience with a little bit. I mean, to me, like they're apples and oranges as far as devices are concerned, and the Nintendo library is the Nintendo library. So um, you're not going to go in there and say, well, the PS5 has this little bit for 50. Like, I think that the $50 isn't enough to sway somebody one way or the other. PlayStation, Xbox versus Nintendo, you have other criteria for making that final call. Now, if the Switch OLED was like $500 and then you're looking like, yeah, maybe that will push you in a direction, but I think that it's not really changing the game there. Um,
So and
yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say the other question is like, is that $50 price increase over the current SKU of the Switch? Like to me, that's a more interesting question, and it's a little bit more of a questionable move. Like you're like, why haven't we had a price cut? It would have been nice to have the OLED come in at the $300 price. We might not have had a cut, but like, hey, we get a little bit some nicer features. So I think that move is the more questionable one.
And it hasn't been said yet, but I'm going to contend that I'm assuming they're going to do this because Nintendo has always done this. At least I haven't seen it said. Maybe it's been said and I didn't track it. I'm assuming that the non OLED SKU is going to go away because there's no way in the world Nintendo would have both SKUs on the market at the same time,
Yeah,
particularly at a price
it's.
differential.
I mean, I don't. When the like 3DS XL came out, how long was the original three? I mean, the 3DS lingered while the supplies kind of flushed out of the system,
Right.
but it wasn't like they kept pumping them out. Like
No.
this is the current SKU now.
Right. Right. Yeah, they'll sell through inventory and then it'll just be the one that you can get.
Yeah,
And I completely agree with you that the libraries are different, but let's talk about a consumer like you or even me or like DBQ will be this fall, right? You're going into the fall not having stepped up to next gen yet. So now your question as you go into the fall is going to be, do I get my PlayStation 5, which maybe is now finally on the market, in supply on the market. Let's assume you're targeting a digital. Do I have to make a choice now between this 350 SKU and a 399 SKU? For me, that's in the one, and I've already made my decision, but we'll just proceed with the hypothesis. For me, that's in my window of my next PC upgrade, right? So I've got to start making that choice. For DBQ, who is a multi platform gamer, I mean, we all are, but his specific situation is he's just procured an Xbox Series X. He's going to be getting into the envelope of, where do I see the games that warrant me getting a PlayStation 5? He might also be in that way. So I feel like there is a large discussion of, because I don't know that the Nintendo Switch is the primary platform for any of us. And so I say, as the secondary platform, which I would contend the Nintendo platform has been for a long time. This has been going on since the Nintendo Wii. It's it's not solely been about how it exists as a primary platform, but it's also been, at a price point you could get an Xbox 360 and a Wii, and that made financial sense, right? More so than a PlayStation and a Wii because the PlayStation was overpriced at the time, right, or whatever. But as a secondary console, does the 350 price point potentially cause a point of friction, particularly when your options might be, I say this to the PlayStation players all the time. If you're angry at Microsoft about what they're doing with exclusivity and yada yada yada, you can get a Microsoft console too at $399, or you can do cloud gaming or whatever. So I won't throw that into the hypothesis, but you know, does that 350 fit as a secondary console onboarding point if that's where it is for a lot of consumers?
yeah. I don't. I mean, $50. It's a price jump, but I don't think it's gonna like completely inhibit people from adopting the Switch as a secondary console. I think the bigger thing is with the Switch Pro, they were lined up to get a lot of current Switch owners to upgrade, and that's not going to happen now. Like it's just, I mean, I'm sure there will be some, but for me, it wasn't a question of do I prioritize this versus that. It's like I'm definitely going to get a PS5. You know, if the Switch was going to be more powerful, no, like a $300 to $350, yeah, I would still proceed with trying to acquire one. But the feature enhancements aren't enough for me to say like my current setup is obsolete. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
absolutely, and it delves into kind of my follow-on question too, which is, I mean, unfortunately, this is maybe telegraphing a little bit into our Pix Plays report out
yeah.
next week, but DBQ challenged all of us on the question of, hey, people are complaining about, not getting any hardware upgrade with this update to the Switch, and that's the way I characterize it. It is an updated SKU, not really an upgraded SKU.
Mhm.
But the question is what games out there really warrant it? And so one of my issues is, again, in terms of, like, I get the reasons why not to do an upgrade from a Nintendo business perspective. These are my theories. These are theories that have been thrown out on the internet and on Twitter. But in a year where we're still kind of having lingering impacts from the pandemic, and there's not a ton really in the release pipeline, people are retooling and regearing still to try and kind of re-engage at the release volume that the industry has been at the norm when people weren't almost so much remote as they are today. And so releasing a Nintendo Switch Pro when there's not really a ton in the release pipeline of what's coming out even on the Nintendo platform isn't really helpful. And so you have the Nintendo Switch OLED coming out on the 8th of October, and the only game coming out this holiday season that I know is of note is Metroid Dread, which is a 2D side-scrolling platformer, and I would contend doesn't really benefit in a huge way from an updated CPU and GPU, and certainly doesn't need to be played at 4K. Um, I mean, again, is it? Do you feel like the 350 price point is commensurate with? I mean, what this thing is going to do largely is it's going to be an update to play the same Nintendo Switch games that you've bought for the last 4 years, and either replay them or continue playing them on a slightly larger screen that is OLED, and which also I think most people know, but OLED handles contrast better and makes color saturation and colors just pop a little bit more. I don't know. You can kind of think of it as a mini HDR effect if you want. But do you feel like that's commensurate, or there's a problem with the notion of popping this thing out when there's no library that really takes advantage of the additional 7-inch OLED screen?
I don't know. Like I just not as much. I think like the scenario that you set up with okay, if it had been a real Switch Pro like we were like most everyone was expecting with more powerful hardware, then what's the marquee title that would you know exhibit it, because they always release something to like show off whatever. Sometimes it's a quirky thing and sometimes it's an awesome thing, but they always have something to go along with it.
Well, you
Then it'd
mentioned
be a problem.
you mentioned the new 3DS and the new 3DS XL last time, and the thing that took advantage of it, and it was the one thing. I only needed one thing to justify the cost, and that was Smash Brothers. Right, Smash Brothers benefited from the bump in the CPU because I was already a title that the 3DS was kind of struggling, would have been struggling to play, and so playing on the new hardware was a plus.
Oh, okay. So that was one of the enhancements, games that had an enhancement.
I
Yeah.
don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if it had. I think it was one of the games that only played on the new 3DS.
No, that was I got a list here, but I don't know. Like it's on like a NeoGaf forum, so I'm not sure like if it's like 100% accurate. But
No, but
I tried to.
what was on there by chance? Because I know that there were like a very small handful of games, but there were ones that, like, if you wanted to play those games, you could only play them on the new 3DS and
So the
3DS
ones
XL.
here that I'm seeing that were 3DS or new 3DS exclusives: Block Form, Box Up, Brick Race, Color Cubes, Cup Critters. None of her. Fire Emblem Warriors, but that's a Warriors title. But so like that's not it's not Awakening. It's not. Format 8, uh, Future Idiom EP Deluxe. I don't know. Galaxy Blaster, Hit Ninja, Hyperlight EX, Lifespeed, Mini Mario and Friends Amiibo Challenge, Minecraft New 3DS Edition, Pink Dot Blue Dot, Pirate Pop Plus, Pixel Hunter, Runbow, Shoot the Ball, The Binding of Isaac, Rebirth, Wind Up Night 2, and the only one that is of note, like, I mean, The Binding of Isaac was like an indie darling, but the only one of note that beyond Fire Emblem Warriors, Xenoblade Chronicles 3D. And as much as Xenoblade Chronicles, like, yeah, it's one of Nintendo's IPs, it's not up there with Mario and Zelda. So, um, it's not even a Donkey Kong at this point. But there are some games like, Ace Combat, there's Ace Combat, like you said, uh, Smash Brothers, Triforce Heroes actually had benefits to the new 3DS, like C stick. This is the C stick, so controls. Okay, so the enhanced games, Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, the Ace Combat. Let's see what else is in here. Pokemon Sun and Moon had faster load times. Um, Smash Brothers, Terraria had played better. So I mean, there were some things, but none of them were like major. So I know you're asking like, well, if this, if that. So I'm just looking at it as like, look, they didn't want to drop the price. They gave us a little bit of a refresh, and they're charging a little bit of a premium for these features, but it also is allowing them to be more profitable because they have their pipeline of hardware and everything, and it's not going to be that different. Um, they're going to make some money. Everybody loses money on the front end with consoles, right? Uh, this will help that. So, like, I get the strategy. Um, it's just, I think we'd be having a very different conversation if the hardware, like all those questions that you had about why isn't there a good enough game? Like, is it okay with just the library? With what it is, like the feature refresh, yeah, it's great. I'm gonna be able to play uh, Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild with a bigger screen. And I got to tell you, my kids still play Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild almost every day. Like they're still a daily occurrence. So yeah, that's great. Um, it almost, if you want to think about it in those terms, not having Metroid Prime 4 or Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 um, coming out this fall almost makes it where it makes more sense to have just this little bit of a refresh rather than a fully fledged uh, hardware improvement. But you know, it is what it is. I get why they did it. Like, and in a couple of years we'll be looking at whatever new thing that they're gonna have. So
Yeah, like I said, I'm not that much on the opposite side of the aisle from you. I get it. It's not for me. I've made that decision already. But if I use my Nintendo Switch more in general, in terms of just like a generic recapitalization strategy, the 4 year point, and this was kind of my perspective with the Xbox One Scorpio as well. I used my Xbox One a lot, and so at that point in the life cycle, it warranted just swapping it out. And same thing here with the Nintendo Switch, right? If I use my Switch more, 4 years of usage of it, those of us who bought at launch certainly worn. By now, your screen's probably a little bit scratched up and it's worn colors and edges, and you probably got
yeah,
bad Joy
uh,
Cons because almost everybody from that era does, right? So
it's 100% like that. Like, just so, like, we are on our second Switch. Like, ours died, and we had to send it to Nintendo, and we got like a factory whatever wiped one with a different serial number. So technically, I have my second Switch, but that would be the one concern. But right now, like, um, I've got young kids that play it, and I'd be a little scared to get something brand new. Like, let them keep beating up the old one. Like, that's kind of where it falls. And like you said, if as it like that's when I will think about adopting. So the question is, how long are they going to stretch this out? If my Switch starts to die and I have like a couple of years left of Switch gaming, then certainly I'll probably look into buying an OLED. But if it's like, well, they're about to release the next whatever, maybe we'll see how backwards compatibility goes, and then maybe look at getting an OLED on the aftermarket. But
Well, and while I asked that round of questions, again, you're the type of consumer where um, there's things in here where I could see making sense, right? If I was gonna, and because I've been considering for years, I was like, I should take the Nintendo Switch and I should move it upstairs and I should let my kids, right, could go ahead and onboard on that console. And I don't because it's still mine and I don't play it a lot, but I'm like, but I want to play it and I'm not gonna turn it over into their hands and let it get messed up and broken and whatnot. But if I wanted to make that move now, absolutely 100%, this would be the point where it would make sense for me to
yeah,
get because I
if you get,
yeah,
yep,
because I'm not getting them the $350 Nintendo. I get the $350 Nintendo Switch, right? And I put it down here on my 4K TV, and I give them like the 4-year-old thing.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that would make absolute sense.
If I played it, like, I mean, going back to your question about the PlayStation and this being the secondary, like, it's just like I I am satiated enough with our current Nintendo Switch where this is not like it doesn't become a question for me. But yeah, I would totally get that use case scenario. Like, this is mommy and daddy's Switch. That's your Switch, the one that gets dropped in the park, even though I told you to leave it at home or whatever. Like, it's just like, why did I just find this on the slide out there?
Right. So let's talk about the piece of hardware that did come out that is the Nintendo Switch upgrade, or as many people would contend it is. Let's talk about Valve's Steam Deck, which dropped out of nowhere today. Like, what in the world? And it was the whole afternoon on Twitter. Unfortunately, I will say also. But the Steam Deck was announced today. There are 3 SKUs. There's a 64 gigabyte one at $399, a 256 gigabyte one. This is all in reference to their SSD. Um, so there's a 256 gigabyte one at $529 and a 512 gigabyte one at $650. Now you get some other bits and bobs along with it that I think are all like marketing chutzpah, so I don't think that there's anything of any significance. Runs on a Zen 2 RDNA 2 custom chip set. So that puts the GPU, at least architecturally, in the same box as the Xbox Series X. And I hate talking about this because I worry about all the people who would pick it. And it's so the PlayStation 5, as far as I understand it, is a not quite RDNA 2 chipset. So there are final implementations that I think Sony didn't wait for in the RDNA package that it got, and so there are some I think relatively minor but still valid deltas between what the Xbox Series and the PlayStation 5 are running. But they're all, I would say, all in the same class and all architecturally in the same conceptual architecture. There are analog control sticks mounted either side, much in the same way that the Nintendo Switch has with its Joy Cons. They are not detachable, as far as I understand. So this is a unitary package. Uh, as I started diving into this, some significant deltas, though, that I feel people should understand. I'm going to try and get to my own Twitter account because I logged most of this stuff there. Uh, oh, sorry. So I'm trying to get back to this conversation. Um, the one the big thing is so the Steam Deck as it comes packaged. We'll get into that conversation as well. Run Steam OS. So that was one of the first things that I dug around for. Is what operating system is this running? Because I think a lot of people jump to the conclusion that it runs Windows. It does not.
Oh wow.
Yeah, right. So it runs Steam OS, which is a Linux variant of the operating system, right? And so it's a Steam Deck. It runs Steam OS. which is based on Linux, which means you ain't going to be going to the Microsoft store from this PC. Now, there's lots of ado about the fact that it has a dock. One of the packages, I think the 650 package comes with the dock, but you can dock it and kind of run it at home as a PC, and that's something we'll get into. But you're not going to take this thing as it comes prepackaged and go to the Microsoft Store and get Halo: The Master Chief Collection, which means also you're not going to get Game Pass, right, on this thing unless you go through the browser and access it that way. You can get to Stadia because Stadia runs on the browser as on Chrome or as a Chrome applet, so that will be available to you. Um, so not only do you not get the Game Pass, but again, things that people were skipping by and all of their rush to do tons of hot takes. Not only do you not get Game Pass, but it's not like you're going to the Steam store to run those Windows games either, because many of them are not released in Linux variants. And so Halo: The Master Chief Collection is only a Windows variant. I suspect that the same is true for games like Forza or anything that comes out of the Microsoft studios that, yes, yea, verily, big upswell that they came to an agreement with Valve and started releasing those games on Steam, but they are not Linux variants, so you aren't going to run it on this thing natively as it comes straight off the shelf to you store bought. Um, Same thing. There was much ado on Twitter today about the fact that Steam said you will be able to access the Epic Store. Again, sure, maybe we're going to loop back and talk about that, but Epic, there aren't Linux-based games for sale on the Epic Store either. So that's a non-starter. Um, and then as you get even further outside of that, so you talk about games that are only available via their specific browser. Rockstar games, Bethesda games that you have to get through the browser. Here's the big one: BattleNet games. There is no Linux version of Call of Duty, so you're not buying this thing to play Call of Duty either. Now, somebody tried to push back on me when I said this on Twitter and said that no, Valve already said that this is false, was the way that person termed it. The Steam Deck can run anything that a PC can. Yes, the hardware can. So you can, but the way you do that is you wipe the OS, you install your own version of an OS, and then yes, this hardware set can do those things and access those stores. I would contend, I think Swiss would agree with me, because we're hardware and software and systems engineers, that at that point, you are now not running a Steam Deck, right? You are running a mobile PC with some modification of an operating system on it. Here's the thing: unless they, like, out of the goodness of their hearts, do it, you are now not under any obligation from Valve to support it. I almost guarantee you their warranty terms and conditions will state that. They may post some things on forums out of the goodness of their heart, but if you run into a problem, they're not obligated to fulfill it. If they say you can run Windows, that's a thing. It's a completely separate thing to find out that there will be Windows drivers for all of the hardware interface points on the chassis, not just the controllers, but any like portrait landscape button. This used to be a thing on tablet PCs all the time. You would get tablet PCs, they would have additional hardware inputs in and around the screen and on the chassis. And yes, you could put Linux on them, but there weren't Linux drivers for those additional bits and bobs. So you would lose functionality when you did that switch. On top of that, there has to be, at the PCB level, driver support, which means it's a custom GPU. So it will probably run okay with a generic like AMD driver that Windows just installs of its own accord because it thinks it's smarter than you. That doesn't mean it's going to be 3D enabled for all of your games. The other thing is the games have to support it, because if the game comes up and it is looking for the primary GPU and it doesn't recognize that custom RDNA GPU, again, you're not going to be supported. So that's an instance where the hardware that Valve produced supports it, the operating system supports it, but the individual application may not. Again, this is another thing where, for instance, in this time when Nvidia was offering I think it was called the Optimus platform, where you would have a GPU package that was a merge, a combination of an Intel um, GPU, or an Intel GPU and an Nvidia GPU, so that it would run the Intel GPU when you were only doing 2D stuff, but then when a game kicked in, supposedly it was supposed to flip over to the Nvidia GPU. The problem with that package was if the game didn't recognize it, the game would keep running the Intel GPU. And so you would get a slideshow of a game. And that was something so deeply buried in the software that often, if that was the case, there was just no workaround. You would hope that the developer would fix it, but like if there wasn't, there was no workaround. That was just a game that just wouldn't run on your system. So this is an instance where if there's a very big game, again, let's talk about Call of Duty, Activision may just say, we're not going to bother, right, supporting that specific variant of the GPU, right? Like that's too small and in the noise for us. So I don't know, Swiss. What was your feeling about as this came out during the day, and what all of the hoopla is about it? And in direct context with this conversation about the Nintendo Switch, would this be a thing that you would buy instead, since there's no Switch Pro?
Absolutely not. So, um, I mean, it's interesting, but let's see. What do we have here from Call of Duty in the Steam store? Let's see. Call of Duty World War II is the most recent iteration. Um,
Yeah,
so
and I pulled that thread earlier today, and what you're seeing is there were Linux variants of Call of Duty released in the Steam store up until the point where Activision made the business decision that they were going to force you to buy Call of Duty through the BattleNet launcher and play it that way. So at that point where that happened, there are no more Linux versions of Call of Duty.
right, which is why I'm not. So I'm with you in that I believe I am not as excited about this device, but for different reasons. I do not expect the Steam Pal, which I think didn't we have a story like a while back that was like the rumor, like there was the Steam Pal that was coming, that was a handheld. So this was it. Um, the Steam Deck. I don't expect it to play Call of Duty. It's a Steam machine. I don't expect it to play Game Pass. It is a Steam machine. I don't expect to get to a Windows store. It's a Steam machine. Like I know what I'm getting. Um, I think they're so to me that those are less problematic. Like I don't buy a Nintendo and being like, man, I wish this thing played Game Pass. Like I get it, it's a Nintendo. So when I buy a Valve hardware, I'm look. I know I'm buying Valve hardware. I'm gonna be locked into the Valve ecosystem. That being said, I do understand maybe why you went on that little bit of a tear because in the store.steampower.com/Steam Deck where they have the announcement, they have your Steam library anywhere. Again, so it's the Steam library, which I understand I'm being locked into that. But it says once you've logged into Steam Deck, your entire Steam library shows up just like any other PC. You'll be able to find your collections and favorites exactly where you left them. So I think the problem is the Steam games that are there, but like, look, they're there, but there's limited utility for them beyond Windows. And anyone that's on like Linux would know, have that innate understanding. And I think that some people um, may be caught by surprise. But then again, I doubt that because the people that are willing to pay this much money for their portable Steam library probably already know what it is they're dealing with. And this is simply not something that's going to compete with Nintendo or um, Microsoft or Sony. It's its own thing. And just like all the other hardware that seems to come out of Valve, it's like a niche thing for Valve fanboys, and they'll buy it up and then it'll like disappear in a year and you'll be like, Remember those Alienware Steam machines? Remember the Steam controller? Remember Steam Link? That was weird, wasn't it? Or that was cool. And it's like it's just gonna be one of those things. It's gonna be one of those things you'll find on eBay and be like, oh yeah, I remember when that was announced and I didn't buy one.
Yeah. It's unfortunately not a large part of the conversation on the internet today. Is but like people don't remember like Steam drops hardware the way that people joke about Google dropping services. Like
Hmm.
for all the flack that people have thrown at Stadia, Valve drops hardware support much faster. Right? Stadia has stuck around longer than Steam boxes did. you know, so I'm actually really surprised. I'm glad to see that Steam OS is continuing to go, but I'm surprised that it has. And so a lot of my comments aren't about bads. It's about these are the things that people need to be aware of before they
Yeah,
go down
pop
this
down
path.
$650 thinking I'm buying a portable PC optimized for gaming.
Right. Right, because
Yeah.
I'm gonna take Call of Duty on the road with me, but also because I mentioned those things because again, there are so many people on the internet who are trying to get followers and clicks and everything. I'm really disappointed at the media to a certain extent today because um, the person who said in my Twitter feed, oh well, Valve already confirmed that this is false because they read an article where some of the gaming media journalists asked some of these questions of Valve. The gaming media journalists didn't ask them the super pervasive questions and invasive questions that need to be asked. Like, great, you'll support installing Windows. Are you going to provide Windows drivers for it? Are you going to provide Windows drivers for the GPU? Once somebody does that, how does that affect the warranty? Have you tested that GPU running under Windows, and can you confirm that it maintains the frame rates?
Does
Um,
it support TPM 2.0?
well, that's the next thing I was going to go into. Now we're going into a world where you probably really need to start moving to Windows 11 if you're a gamer, as I feel like because the fact of the matter is Windows 8 and Windows 10 have provided better and more efficient abstraction layers in their implementation of DirectX and how that interacts with in the operating system. And when you look at benchmarks for games running across the operating systems, the frames are better as you move up in operating systems. So if you want to go to Windows 11, you're absolutely right. You need to have Valve needs to be asked. Gaming media journalists should have been asking these questions instead of some of the stupid ones that they asked. They should have asked whether or not the thing has a TPM on it. And if it doesn't have a TPM, does it have a BIOS enabled implementation that supports it as a substitute in a manner in which Microsoft says that that's compliant with their implementation of Windows 11? Big questions, right? That should be asked again. But like you, I don't feel like this is a Nintendo Switch or Switch Pro contender. It's great, Scott. Tons of people on Twitter contended today. I don't think that's the thing. Great, please, please, please. I'm really trying to get out of the market of like making hardware recommendations to people and more so saying this is how I feel about it based on my assessment of the requirements and how it meets my needs. But here's a regression, right, from that personal improvement I'm trying to make. Please, 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 if you were looking for a Nintendo Switch Pro, don't rush out and plunk down money for your reservation fee for this because I don't know that it's a substitute. But like you, I feel like people who want to play a Nintendo Switch Pro, they're looking to play Mario and Yoshi and Breath of the Wild, and those things won't be present on this platform. So I really don't think that's the market question. I do think this presents an alternative to a gaming laptop because as I go back to how and why I use the Switch, this is the thing that prevents me from lugging a 10-pound gaming laptop and its 5-pound power supply on travel because I can stuff this thing in my bag. Not the first implementation of something like this that there's been. Razer also came out with a mobile gaming PC in a tablet form factor that had controllers on the side. Um, but that was like an Atom processor and an Intel GPU, so it was incredibly anemic in what it could play. Um, but yeah, that's my big thing. My big thing would be make sure you understand what this thing is compatible with. Make sure you understand that if you think it will do, what you need it to do. Make sure you understand how it would do it. Make sure you understand how that impacts the warranty. I'm sure the actually crowd is going to come out and say, well, you can run Windows on Wine in an emulator and boxed in a VM. And I'm like, okay, hopefully those people who would claim that understand that that layer of abstraction has an impact to performance, and that you should expect that you're not going to get the maximum hardware acceleration envelope that you normally can. All those things are questions. And then it's still a compatibility thing, right? Because you never know whether or not a game inside a VM is going to reach out and try and touch a port or enable a service based thing that it needs to run, for instance, in how it phones home or how it accesses a service. You don't know if it's going to work through the virtualization layer until the vendor confirms it, right, and has tested it. And if you're rolling the dice on that science experiment, then some of those things aren't going to work.
And I think one last like thing to kind of wrap this up. When I think PC gaming, I think keyboard and mouse. And I know that like I know you can put your controllers on. Like I mean, I for all like me joking around at Xbox and stuff. I mean, I have an Xbox One controller that I like that I use for a handful of games when I do PC gaming. When I play Ace Combat 7, love having that controller with me. But primarily like 95% of the time, I, I want a keyboard and I want the keyboard and mouse. That's why I chose to purchase said game on the PC platform versus the PS4, for example. And this doesn't have a keyboard and mouse. So like I don't care that my entire library is on there because most of the games I'm not going to want to play um you know Total War with a thumbstick. It's just not going to work. So
Yeah, so there are questions down that lane that I would also ask. Like you said, the whole reason for being a PC gamer is because you can bring the power of peripherals that you choose along with you. Now this is dockable, and so you can use those peripherals. But as far as how it plays out on the market, I go, okay, if I'm a hardcore PC gamer and I've got my, AMD RX 5700 XT right here, again, I've talked in recent weeks about how when I have that stuff, I don't play the low power compute game, right? When I'm at home, I use those things on travel. So I'm not going to buy this thing to run at home when I have much more powerful gear here. I think it is an answer for it's a great answer for instance a high schooler, right? Or even a college kid who wants to get into PC gaming, and great Scott, let's teach them not to get into debt to buy their $3,000 gaming rig as a college student when they really don't have the maturity to appreciate it, right? In fact, right? Just get them this $399 thing, get them started, get them into the environment, get them onboarded, and then, for those kids who are also highly mobile, they can take it with them, is another kind of play. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think this thing is competing against the thing that people say that it's competing
I
against.
I will lay my marker down that it will be a forgotten piece of hardware, in a year or two. So
Yeah. That being said, I'm curious about it.
it's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool looking. Like I mean, it's neat, but like I'm not gonna buy one.
Right. Right. Yeah, and not running Windows. We talked, a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Not, Windows 11 brings direct storage, which allows you to cross things over directly from the GPU to the C to well, directly from the hard drive directly to the GPU without the CPU getting in between. You don't get that when you're not running on Windows with DirectX. So, that all being said, it might, for me, where I say, what I buy on the Nintendo Switch are PC ports and big console ports, so I can take them with me. This might be a thing for me, right? I mean, I could see where it would be logical for me to get rid of my Nintendo Switch and get this thing instead, as a portable device. But while you're digging on the store, is there a Linux version of Destiny 2, by the way?
I have no idea. I will Google that though.
So that would be one that I'd be very curious about. So yeah, it's an interesting thing, but like as you said, it'll be very curious. I'll be very curious to see how it plays out in the rest of the year. Or over the years. Let's quickly talk about anything notable from PlayStation State of Play that you saw.
Uh, I glanced at just quick.
Yeah.
No, Destiny 2 does not run on
Okay.
Linux. So yeah, I glanced through. I will confess I did not actually watch the state of play. Um, but I scanned through and looked at some of the games, and most of them aren't really like my thing. Um, Jet to Far Shore kind of looked neat, and then I kind of like had like PTSD about my experience with Journey, and I'm like, probably not. Um, but there is one game that came up in the state of play that I already had on my radar, and that is Lost Judgment. And I am not going to watch the trailer because I don't want any spoilers. So, and that is a uh, I brought that game up I think a few weeks ago, and I'll be talking about it more next week on the GX show because I've had a lot more time with the original Judgment and the way things are shaping up. If I can snag a PS5, Lost Judgment might actually be my first PS5 purchase. So that's like tells you how things are going. Preview for the GX show next week. But the other thing is the other game that I've had on my radar for a while has been Deathloop. Um, so, but I think that got delayed again.
Yeah, I
Is that
want to.
is that accurate?
I can't remember.
Oh
There's
wait,
been
no, this one's PS5 on. There's another. There's two of them that are out that are. What's the other Bethesda game that's coming out for PS5?
I can't remember, but I
Might
know
be confusing.
something. I know something that was on our radar got delayed to 2022 today.
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
remember what it is, but we'll probably be able to Google for that while we're talking. Yeah, it's neat. I'm very glad to hear that you're enjoying Lost Judgment so much, um, because I
Just Judgment. Lost
Just
Judgment's
Judgment,
the
right?
sequel.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Because I think you and I, Tao kind of led the way with his affinity for the Yakuza series. I onboarded to it late, through Game Pass. I've chosen not to get into it, but in our own ways, we've both come around to more of us enjoying kind of the Yakuza properties in different ways, and so it's great to see you going down that path. It's unfortunate that you mentioned Lost Judgment, maybe your first PS5 game, when I guess it's when they've concurrently announced that they'll no longer be doing Yakuza spin-offs, and so that might be the last Yakuza spin-off,
Yeah.
probably, that will get
I
published.
mean, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of PS5 games that I have like
Yeah.
will be coming that I'll be excited about. The game was Ghostwire Tokyo. That
Yes.
was the
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
that we
Right.
were
Right.
looking
Right.
at.
Yep.
So that's 2022. So Deathloop has been interesting, but I really want to wait and see what kind of the impressions are when that game comes out because I could see that going either way very easily based on what I've been seeing.
Yeah, the mechanics. The mechanics. It looks like a solid shooter. The question is how repetitive does the death looping get? Um, as I mentioned to my wife last night as we were watching, and I won't spoil it, but as we were watching Loki, the season finale. I'm saying no spoilers because I'm assuming that people kind of generically know where the MCU is heading in Phase Four, topically. And I just mentioned to my wife, it's neat that they're doing this, but I always worry when properties go down this path when they start using, multiverses and timelines and time travel as a crutch for poor, sloppy writing, and for just wackadoodle reveals and cameos like out of nowhere. So that's kind of my worry about Deathloop, is that it just becomes like a poor writing crutch. I don't expect that from Arcane Studios. Um, I'm just wary. I love Dishonored and Dishonored 2 and Prey and what they did with that. I'm wary about how that studio will handle this particular mechanic. So like you, I'm in a wait and see mode. I have high hopes and the utmost confidence, but I want that kind of corroborated by some reviews.
Well,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
will it be I liked Majora's Mask, so like that made it work, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I did like some of the kind of time travel aspects of Titanfall 2, for instance. But I felt like that's an instance where they were used, but they weren't overused. But I will even say with Titanfall 2, it got right to that edge where I was at a point where there were some very tough puzzles that I like didn't get right away, and that it took me like several, and I just hit some points during those game sessions that I was just like, I need to walk away from this. Like I'm tired of like this time looping crap, because it also wasn't a core mechanic of the game really. It was just a puzzle thing. But I've been super interested in the game Sifu. And I love the fluidity of the combat and kind of what we're seeing coming out of that. So that was one thing that I was interested in out of the state of play. But like you, I've largely just been keeping my eye on Deathloop and hoping that it comes out and hoping that the time travel mechanic is an enhancement and does it that many reviewers don't start telegraphing that it's a pain in the butt. Kind of like Kevin Medeiros, who I podcasted with on an alternate show while for a little while this year or whatever, was a big fan of Medium, and that was kind of my question: does like the going back and forth between dimensions, does that just become a pain, in its repetitiveness, throughout the game? So be interesting to see that. Yeah. Other than that, I didn't really, again, because it has so many people who are on the platform, nobody's ever going to complain about whether or not they were disappointed in the state of play, and anybody who does would get dogpiled, on the internet. But after so much was announced at E3 to make us all kind of mouthwater about what was coming down the pike, this I just kind of felt like didn't really do anything to make me super excited about being a PlayStation 5 owner. Just because a game like Death Stranding, is not in my wheelhouse, so that was probably one of the
I mean,
most. Yeah, go ahead.
it's not in your wheelhouse, but again, it's a PS4 game. Like, when's Ragnarok coming? When's Forbidden West coming out? Like, those are the ones that would get people excited at the state of play.
Right, right. So I'm hoping, not this year. I think is the writing on the wall. I'm
Yeah.
hoping that what I would hope. This goes back to some of our Nintendo Switch conversation earlier. Like, yes. There's no games that warrant having a Nintendo Switch Pro on the market this year, but the way I look at hardware is kind of from that PC perspective. Like, I don't buy hardware upgrades for PC because Cyberpunk is coming out, because Call of Duty is coming out, no, I buy when those games are at a low, so that when they do come out, I don't have to run out and buy hardware and deal with the time delay of an upgrade and integration and smoothing and settling the whole thing out. I buy the hardware like 6 months ahead of time or a year ahead of time. I use it to play and tech demo a bunch of games that I already have on the upgraded hardware. Then when the new games come out, I'm already ready, right? Um, and I don't, that's when it happens. I really am just totally decoupled from the game release
Yeah.
cycle for hardware upgrades. But for that same token, but I do justify, right, my investments in hardware by saying, as I did last holiday, I'm buying my Xbox Series and my PlayStation now because when Halo Infinite comes out, I don't want to have to worry about having to run out and buy a $500 console, right? And like 10 games in the holiday release window. I want to already have that expended, have recuperated from that expenditure already, and then just be able to spend the money on the games. So,
Yeah. And that's kind of why I feel like the fall is probably going to be my target for the PS5. So hopefully they'll be out more, and then, like you said, it'll be ahead of the God of War Horizon Zero Dawn wave. So
yeah, and I'd hope for the Nintendo that that thing comes out, and for people who want to go down that path, that they buy it this fall, and then they're ready for Breath of the Wild 2, next year. Um, so yeah, that'll be good. Uh, let's see, a few more stories here. Next gen upgrades at a higher price. So EA sticking their foot in it again. I don't get this. Like, I don't understand how you have come through the Battlefront 2 thing from 2 or 3 years ago. Your developers dug their heels in and brought that thing back from the edge, even though I don't think a lot of people went back and played it, but they did what they needed to do. They hard swerved from the greed that was shown in the microtransactions of Battlefront 2 in the lack of content, and by the end of the life cycle on that game title, right, really brought it back to tons of content, tons of characters and hero characters, tons of upgrades, right? Now EA says that it is going to restrict next gen upgrades for FIFA and Madden. Admittedly, their most profitable franchises, but also two of the most maligned last year releases, like FIFA 21 and Madden NFL 21 did not review well, particularly on next gen hardware. Um, now basically saying you have to buy the digital only Ultimate Edition to get access to the upgrades. And there's all types of. One of the issues with this is that it's a totally Byzantine scheme. So it's another one of these in an era where navigating the digital stores is difficult enough. They've thrown out this incredibly convoluted thing of like you only can get to the next gen version by going through certain upgrade paths. And Twitter has been rife with these, with like the Onimusha director's cut and other things, where like it's really complicated to understand what do you need to buy. Destiny 2 has also gone down this path, and I don't give them a pass either. I don't raise as much cane about it because I I bought my versions right, and I always just buy the whole. But it's always a difficult thing that like what exactly do I need to buy to get to what. Um, but basically, you have to buy certain versions of FIFA 22 and Madden 22 to be able to get to the next gen upgrades. If you buy in at the low end, there's no feasible path then to bridge that version onto next gen with enhancements. I know you're not a big sport player, but any feelings about this at all as far as it directly impacting you or just in terms of EA, who seemed to have been crawling its way back from the most horrible publisher on the planet ever to some degree of fandom, how this impacts their cred on the market.
Um, okay. So like I had to refresh myself on like what dual entitlement actually was because like hasn't been a thing for me since I haven't been getting new consoles. Um, yeah, I mean it just feels very EA. It feels like a decision made at the top and just like, hey, you know, suck it up. So yeah, I don't know, like on the one hand, I feel like how would you I mean I'll kind of like change this up with another question. How would you feel if they just said, you know what? The Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 have been around long enough. We're not doing dual entitlement, period. Would that be acceptable to you?
Yeah, if they just dropped the last gen versions.
Yes.
Yeah, I would be fine with that.
Because I think that's where the problem is. It's like you have it like one foot like you have the whole thing where it's like, yeah, we're being friendly to you, the customer. You can buy a PS4 version and then like there's all these asterisks. I think that's the problem. It's like it's not so much like look, we don't want to support it. It's like showing that we can support it. We're just choosing not to for you. It's like that's the thing. It's
right.
like just rip the band-aid off. If you want to rip the band-aid off, rip it off. But they feel like they can make more money this way, so they'll make more money this way. It's like that's
Yeah.
kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, if your effort was to force people onto the next gen versions, then just drop support for the last gen versions, right? So, yeah, and I sorry I had time to pick back to reread this again. So the deal is last year you you were able to buy in at any level and get the next gen upgrades regardless of what level, right? So if you bought the $60 version for Xbox One or PlayStation 4, you were entitled to. You also were able to play the next gen version. So this year, what they're saying is that you have to buy the Ultimate Edition at $100, and that will entitle you to the next gen upgrade. So you will get the last gen version and the next gen version. And that if you buy in at the lower levels, you just get the last gen version. And like you said, right here, and there's the rub and there's the problem. I don't give a crap about the last gen version. I don't have last gen version consoles. So basically, what they're saying is for those who have made the transition to next gen, your only option to play FIFA or Madden is to pay $100. Now, after all the slag I've been throwing Sony about the $70 games, and $70 games don't bother me. What bothers me is you're pushing a $70 game for a game that I just bought last year at $60 in order to play the next gen version, right? That there's no upgrade path, right? Or like we've been talking about, it's incredibly convoluted for me to even understand. And yeah, that's the problem. I mean, like $70 for a game, I think is acceptable. $100 for a game to play the next gen version of it, that you could pound sand about that. Like that's just egregiously out of whack with the rest of the market, regardless of whether or not there should have been game pricing upgrades over the last few years anyway, which I don't disagree with. But you walk up to it,
What
right? You
I
don't.
thought this was, yeah, I thought this was just the Ultimate Edition. From what I'm understanding, there's still, um, you can probably still buy the regular edition for PS5 and Series X.
Yeah, you
At
would.
the standard edition at regular cost. I just on the
Yeah,
right.
yes, you would be playing the last gen version of them via backwards compatibility on your new console. So yes, but what it's saying is that the only way in which, but you can't buy those old versions and upgrade or play them on the new console and get those enhancements. You can only, so if I'm so again, the way I look at it is if I've made the transition to next gen, and I want to play next gen games, right? Like there's just no, for an ROI perspective, there is never a time where for me where there's a last gen version and a next gen version available that I buy the last gen version. That just wouldn't make.
Right.
Yeah.
No, but what I'm saying is like I can buy Madden 22 standard edition 100% PS5 version. It's not $100. So like they're not forcing me down the $100 path. I still get this ultimate, you know, if I want the ultimate, that's I pay premium for the ultimate. This really only affects the people that are like at current hardware considering buying, want to get new hardware once it becomes available, and they're like, well, I can buy the standard edition. I can't get my hands on an Xbox Series X, but when I will, I want to be able to upgrade my Madden 22, and now they're being forced down the ultimate path. Like I think that's the narrow group of people that we're talking about. And again, it's just like a the used car salesman presentation to me is like the stereotypical used car salesman presentation. That's where I'm like drawing the line. So I don't know. I guess I'm not as up in arms about it, but it's just it feels like it's needlessly like, oh yeah, I'm a little bit. I'm still dealing with EA being EA.
Yeah, and you're probably not
Maybe I'm
wrong.
misunderstanding what you're saying.
No, no, I think that's a great interpretation of it. Yeah, and so first of all, I think regardless, right, where we're at is the point where it's incredibly confusing and it doesn't need to be, right, and it's
Right.
down that same path of, and again, you know, whether people agree with it or not, you know, I will say, you know, I throw this in the bucket of, it's the same thing with like Miles Morales and Spider and all these things where it's like, yeah, but I can't just go to the store and buy the thing without wanting absolute assurances that I understand what I'm buying, right? Because it's convoluted and messy and it's unclear. And then it gets into the, okay, if little Bobby sends mom to the store to buy Madden for his PlayStation 5, right? And she doesn't understand or dad doesn't understand, right now we're in this thing. No, you appear to be right because I'm on the PlayStation Store now, and it looks like there is a $70 version of Madden NFL 22 for the PlayStation 5. So you're right. I think you can, if you're on next gen hardware, you could still buy in at $60 or $70. Um, it's just if you, like you said, if you're on current gen, if you're on last gen hardware and you're buying a title that you expect to be able to essentially port over onto next gen at some point, the only way it will do so is if you buy in at $100. So you basically have to prepay for your next gen upgrade, um, at a cost of $30, to have assurances that you can bring it over.
But the gamer like, and you know, I'll be honest, like from a business perspective, it's a reasonable, to me, that's a reasonable request. Like, look, you're on last gen hardware, you're buying a PS4 game, you don't necessarily have to get the PS, like, you don't deserve the PS5 game. Like, to me, like, I still think things, a Nintendo game and a Super Nintendo game are two different things, even if they're the same title. But, like, I know I'm old about that, but still. So, but the presentation and the little asterisk and this and that, it just looks bad, and it's like, to me, it's bad publicity that's needless. It's just like, rip the band-aid off. I can understand why last year they did what they did. Everyone else was doing that, and we're like right at the borderline of a console switchover. But we're a year in, and I know that the hardware has been difficult, but EA should say that's not our problem. Um, we're making the games for PS5 or the PS4 games, and if you anticipate buying a PS5 in the next few months, just buy the PS5 game and wait a little bit. Or sign up for EA Online, whatever it is that we call it, and then you can have everything.
Right. That's that. I think that's the real kicker is just sign up for our service. The interesting
Yeah.
thing is, and I'll have to dig at this, but I I, I wonder if game people on Game Pass don't even have to worry themselves with this. That if you're on Game Pass, you get
Whatever
the
it is you're at, the level you're at.
well, and I'd have to dig deeper. Again, it's because they're making it complicated. It's because in the past there have been like instances where what you got on Game Pass was not the next gen version, and that if you wanted access to the next gen version, you had to buy that. But I think you could buy that at a really, I don't know, not a super steep discount, like a 10, like you only had to pay $10 for it, but you get a discount. What's interesting is you're not wrong that it's a reasonable ask, because at $100, if I look at it like you're prepaying for the upgrade, I think Miles Morales for the PlayStation 5 I think was $30 if you had I think if you had Spider-Man already. I think you for $30 you got the Miles Morales DLC plus the enhancements to Spider-Man. I think is the way it worked. So I don't think a $30 ask is unreasonable or out of whack with what the market has been asking. You're absolutely right on that. So I think the last thing that I will bring up is, and I didn't talk about the transition from talking about the platforms to kind of how the business is changing its monetization. So I'll just junk both of these things together. Assassin's Creed is making a transition to a series as a live service. And concurrently, Netflix is talking about beginning to offer video games through its service. So I think a lot of what's been going on as a trend around the industry most recently is that everybody's looking for different monetization models that are different than you going down to GameStop and buying a $60 or $70 game. Some of these things are interesting. There's been a lot of flack about Assassin's Creed, and my personal feeling from being a person who has played a lot of those last iterations, not to the depth that DBQ has. I've spent more time with the Division 2. He spent a lot of time with the last iterations of Assassin's Creed. I'm okay with this going, just because from a creative aspect, Assassin's Creed is no. I feel like Ubisoft had to do one or two things. Assassin's Creed is no longer about being an assassin, right? I mean, it's diverged to become this action adventure game that's much more like Uncharted, right? Um,
Uncharted History Channel edition.
right. So my feeling is they had to do something to change the script. My feeling is they had two choices. It was either get back to being about being an assassin, and a like hardcore assassin, like not the last few things that it's been about this super level up loot thing, action adventure, almost Zelda like in some ways kind of thing, or go in this direction. And I think given those choices, if you don't want to go back to the assassin DNA of the past, I feel like this is an acceptable creative branch because it's going to allow that development team to play around with what do we do with this IP when it becomes a live living service. And that's a creatively interesting path because it's inherently different development and support when you're talking about doing something that's a Destiny 2 or a Destiny 2 like, um, that's different than doing your one and done game, or even doing your one game with a roadmap of 2 or 3 release drops over the year. Um, I know you've expressed some disenchantment with the game as a service model in the past few months. You're not a big
That's,
Assassin's Creed player. Does this make any difference to you at all?
I mean, I enjoyed the little bit of Odyssey that I played. Um, and it was always that game where I was like, I got to get back and actually dig in. But given the amount of stuff that you can do in these new Assassin's Creed, like the RPG, Ubisoft open world iterations, it's overwhelming just because it's like, wow, I don't have time to actually explore this game the way it deserves to be explored. And I can't imagine combining that with time boxed um, seasonal events. So I'm probably not going to pick this up. But like you said, this is just me um, feeling like burnt out. And I haven't even done it very much, but burnt out on the live service model. Every now and then one will be announced where like we talked about last week with Control, or 2 weeks ago, the live service model, and that's that universe, and I'm like, oh, that might be cool. And you're probably right. I'm probably gonna get upset with it and um, not want to play it. But but yeah, it's just, it is what it is. Like, it's not gonna, these models just don't, like, I don't enjoy feeling pressured to complete something. Like the fear of missing out like aspect as like a stick doesn't work. I want more carrots, I guess you could say.
What if this is bite-sized, more digestible Assassin's Creed along the lines of there isn't so much the notion of a long-term career progression loop like there is with Destiny 2, and it's each quarter we release a chapter which could be an Assassin's Creed adventure in a different locale in a different historic period, and you have the
Like like mini campaigns.
yeah, like kind of episode. Getting back to this notion of episodic content that the industry played around with before, which never really panned out.
I
But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so like with Destiny 2, the most fun that I had with it was when I was going through the early campaigns, because they were like little arcs, and my wife and I and you and I, like I think the three of us got together like one week for a few nights and finished out a campaign. But it was like those types of experiences where you can start, you can go through the arc, and you can finish and feel like you accomplished something was fun. And then Destiny 2 has started to push those aside, and it became this like grind. And I feel like that's what all of them are. It's, but we'll see. Like, I mean, I've seen live services implemented the way that I like, but that's not necessarily the way that probably makes a lot of money. Um,
Yeah, so I could see. I think I would be down for an Assassin's Creed that said gave me a wall of like the different chapters and adventures, mini campaigns that I had played through, and just made it about I made a character, and that character could play in those or not play in those, and I got a little trophy or something at the end for each of those, whether or not so not even me being wrapped around the axle about a persistent capability that carried over like I normally am with other games. Excuse me, but just made it like it could be significant where they said, "Hey, this year Assassin's Creed is all going to be about Assassin's Creed Bulgaria." I don't know. I'm picking something out of thin air, right? But
mhm.
we're taking you back to this epoch in time in what used to be Bulgaria, and we're going to give 4 season passes of 4 mini campaigns and adventures for this year. And over like a 5 year time period, I could say, hey, I did all 4 chapters in the Bulgaria campaign, or hey, I missed out on the southeastern U.S. campaign, or whatever. It could also be a hugely great educational model. Like, so as you go around and traverse all these different, as being somebody who recently got back into Three Kingdoms, and then bought like the Three Kingdoms comic book that I'm gonna read through, and then hopefully can get my daughters in to introduce them to, ancient ancient East Asian history, and get them like that could be a huge thing, right? As I think about all of these things, like I learned so many things from like playing Civilization, or that fueled me to go out and like do a Wikipedia search for that, and then onboard and read a book about that, and then like
Yeah.
become more knowledgeable about
Just
that.
I remember back in the day with Age of Empires 2, after playing with the civilization, it's like, huh. And then they had the little like encyclopedia entries basically as like in the menu. So yeah, totally. But it's almost like, okay, rather than trying to put together a 200-hour experience and drop it in the holiday season, let's take the pressure off the developers and just do pieces of that and release it incrementally. That I mean, I could see that working. I mean, let me rephrase that. I can see myself enjoying that. I don't know if that would work for Ubisoft, but yeah, we'll see.
Right. So let's wrap up with this really quick discussion of Netflix, because they didn't really announce anything. They hired somebody. We talked about how people are wildly extrapolating these hiring announcements as like key indicators, like the company's going to do these 99 different things, and I'm like, I don't necessarily know that it means that. But they hired Mike Verdu, who formerly worked at EA and oversaw the company's mobile game studios. Hired him and said that they plan on stepping their foot, dipping their toe into gaming, but made no further announcements. So we don't know if they're going to release physical copies of games, or if these are going to be digital, or if these are going to be digital games that you buy through the Netflix app, which you can't do on iOS because Apple won't allow them to purchase things. So, we don't know how this is going to turn out. It could be just Netflix becomes another publishing house like Activision, and you buy these games through the Steam store or whatever, or the Epic. They sign an exclusivity agreement with Epic, right? We just don't know. We don't know if these are going to be streaming cloud enabled games. That would make a lot of sense given Netflix's technology and their pioneering and innovation in that area. Um, you know, if if this is if it's Netflix and Netflix runs on AWS, does Amazon get a play in here somehow? Does it show up on Luna? We don't know. You are a Netflix subscriber, so your family's in that zone. Kids play Nintendo.
Not
Not,
anymore.
not.
I
Oh,
went old.
what's that? I'm sorry, you dropped
Yeah,
out.
like I'm sorry. So like I went old school. Like I'm Plex now. So like um, got my own media server because like you know how I feel about services at this point. Like I'm kind of getting crotchety here, but like with Netflix, it's I'm just gonna wait and see. Like yeah, there's a lot of questions about what could it could actually be. Um, but you look at Luna and you look at Stadia. Okay, what were they going to be and what have they become? Uh, you know, so it has to prove itself. And then if you have the people that are like Netflix is getting into game, I mean, they've been wildly successful with their own properties for television, right? I mean, you got Stranger Things and everything like that. Um, well, they'll do it in games and it'll be great. They'll be able to do. Well, I mean, let's look at what Amazon did. They have Prime, and how did what was it? Crucible work out? And we still haven't seen New World. Is that like the last ditch effort? I think probably coming out of Amazon's development studios. So I think it's too soon to say that it's going to be great, but I also think it's too soon to pan it. But I am pessimistic.
Yeah, sorry, I was just maneuvering my coffee around here. Yeah, I agree with you. It's not the time yet to wildly extrapolate what this may mean. It's interesting and of note. It could very well easily just be a Netflix is absolutely convinced, and this is they have shown and they have proven. Netflix is absolutely convinced in the development of television properties that platform off of game IP. So they've got the Witcher series. They've done Castlevania. They're probably absolutely going to do more in that vein. This could simply be them bringing on board someone who has that insider understanding of what makes gamers. Gamers are historically very acerbic when it comes to the porting of those IPs that they have fallen in love with to different mediums. And so this could just be wanting to bring somebody on who is an advisor or can partner with like an Ubisoft or an Activision to bring those properties to the big screen. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it pans out. We just don't know. The easy leap is to assume that there's going to be a game section in the Netflix app, and that somehow you will be able to access cloud streaming. But I think that's a presumptive leap to make. Could be true, but we just don't know at this point. I think that's going to wrap it up for us from the news perspective because we're at the 1.5 hour point. The picks plays, what we'll be reporting out on next week, will be as follows. Feel free to play along with us in this assignment because it's what we will be doing. The Nintendo Switch OLED was announced this week, and while it provides a larger screen, it lacks any processor changes or an upscaling dock. We all own a Switch, and some of us play it more frequently than others. What game in your collection could have really benefited from a more powerful Switch? Play a little, and let's talk about the missed opportunities of this announcement. Or take the Defender approach and play something that helps justify why Nintendo did not need to produce a hardware upgrade. DBQ Hams has made his game selections for the assignment. He is notionally going to be playing Mario Golf and Xenoblade Chronicles. I will be playing Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War and F1 2022, and I will explain how and why that's relevant to the assignment next week when we report out. Swiss, have you made any selections for this particular assignment?
Yes, and I have been playing a game, but I will leave it for next week to announce what it is.
Okay, next week we will switch up roles. We will have the same cast. I will be here. I think I updated this, but didn't swap the roles. I will be here, but I will not be hosting. Swiss will actually be hosting. I will be here co-hosting. That's what I mean by switching chairs. And I believe DBQ will be back along for the ride as well. Until then, we will be back on this channel doing the live show as well as doing the recorded canned version, archive version, which you will be able to view on YouTube or listen to as well as download over Pocket Cast, Spotify, or SoundCloud. We'll be doing that here next week at roughly 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Until then, take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there. Play the games that you like. Come here to listen to us talk about the games that we love. Join us in the conversation. Until next time, good night, good luck, and good gaming. That's going to do it for us. We're out of here.